Whispers in the Dark. It started on a rainy Tuesday evening in our quiet suburban neighborhood. My name's Mark and I work from home as a freelance writer. My wife, Laura, works night shifts at the hospital, leaving me alone with our newborn daughter, Lily. You'd think taking care of a baby would be routine, but there's nothing routine about what happened to us. That night, I put Lily to bed as usual. She's a sweet baby, always smiling and giggling, which makes my job a bit easier. After tucking her in, I settled into my office, hoping to get some writing done. But the rain's steady drumming on the roof had me feeling drowsy. I was just about to doze off when I heard it. Soft, ghostly whispers coming through the baby monitor. At first, I thought it was static or maybe a neighbor's TV. But as I listened more closely, I could swear the whispers were coming from Lily's room. My heart pounded in my chest as I rushed to check on her. She was sound asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Must be my imagination, I muttered, returning to my desk, but the unease lingered. This wasn't the first time I'd heard strange things at night. As a kid, I often heard whispers too, which my parents dismissed as nightmares. It left me with a fear of the dark and a tendency to let my imagination run wild. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks again, I thought. The whispers continued the next few nights, growing clearer, almost like a conversation I couldn't quite understand. I didn't mention it to Laura. She was exhausted enough from her night shifts. Instead, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Then, during a trip to the grocery store, an old woman approached me. Her eyes were intense, and she grasped my arm tightly. "Don't listen to the whispers in the dark," she said, her voice shaky. "They mean harm." "What do you mean?" I asked, but she just shook her head and walked away, leaving me with a chill down my spine. That night the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I had to find out what was happening, no matter how scared I was. Ever since that eerie encounter with the old woman at the grocery store, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The whispers through the baby monitor were unnerving enough, but now I felt like I was being watched. Little things started to change around the house, and not in a good way. It was a Friday night. Laura had left for her shift, and I was alone with Lily again. The rain had stopped, but the air felt heavy, almost oppressive. I settled into the living room with a book, trying to distract myself from the creeping dread that seemed to hang over me. Suddenly, the baby monitor crackled to life. This time, the whispers were clearer. It was like someone was standing right next to the monitor, speaking in a low, urgent tone. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone sent chills down my spine. I dashed to Lily's room, but just like before, she was sleeping soundly. I tried to ignore it, but as I turned to leave, I noticed something odd. The room felt colder than the rest of the house. I could see my breath forming in the air, a thin, misty cloud. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. "Lily, you're safe," I whispered, more to reassure myself than her. I backed out of the room, keeping my eyes on her crib until I was in the hallway. I closed the door gently, hoping the chill would stay contained. In the following days, small, unsettling details began to pile up. I'd find Lily's toys in strange places I knew I hadn't left them. Her favorite stuffed bunny appeared on the kitchen counter one morning, even though I was sure it had been in her crib the night before. One night, as I was washing dishes, I heard a faint laugh, like a child's giggle, echoing through the baby monitor. My hands froze, suds dripping onto the floor. The giggle was soft, but unmistakable. Heart pounding, I turned off the faucet and grabbed the monitor, listening intently. The giggle stopped, replaced by the whispering again. This time, it sounded almost frantic. "What do you want?" I whispered back, my voice trembling. Silence, and then, just as I was about to put the monitor down, a single word came through, clear as day. "Leave." I stumbled back, almost dropping the monitor. What did it mean? Was someone trying to warn me, or was it something more sinister? I couldn't tell Laura about this. She'd think I was losing it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening was just the beginning. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier with each passing day. Shadows seemed to linger in the corners longer than they should, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Even Lily seemed affected. She'd cry at odd times, staring at the ceiling or a dark corner of the room with wide, terrified eyes. "Mark, we need to talk about this," Laura said one morning after a particularly restless night. "I found Lily's bunny in the hallway at 3 in the morning. I know I didn't put it there." I nodded, finally realizing I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. "There's something wrong with this house, Laura. I've been hearing things, seeing things. We need to figure out what's going on." Laura looked at me with a mix of concern and determination. "We will. We'll get to the bottom of this. But for now, let's just keep a close watch on Lily and each other." Her words were comforting, but deep down, I knew the whispers were only the beginning. The true horror was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The days dragged on, and the atmosphere in our house grew tenser. Laura and I tried to keep things normal for Lily, but the whispers and strange occurrences were wearing us down. The weight of the unseen presence in our home started to drive a wedge between us. One evening, after putting Lily to bed, Laura and I sat in the living room. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Laura's eyes were dark with worry, her usually calm demeanor strained. She was always the strong one, holding everything together, but even she was starting to crack. "I found another toy in the hallway this morning," Laura said quietly, breaking the silence. "Mark, this isn't normal. We need to do something." "I know," I replied, my voice hollow. "I'm just not sure what. Maybe we should call someone, a priest or a medium." "A medium? Do you hear yourself?" Laura snapped, her frustration boiling over. "We need real help, not some charlatan who'll take our money and tell us we have bad energy." Her anger stung, but I knew it was coming from fear. "I'm scared too, Laura," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we can't keep ignoring this. It's getting worse." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I'm sorry, Mark. I'm scared for Lily. What if something happens to her?" That fear had been gnawing at me too. Every night, I lay awake, listening to the whispers, dreading that they might turn into something more sinister. "We'll figure it out," I promised, though my words felt hollow. "We'll keep her safe." The stress was taking its toll. I found myself snapping at Laura over the smallest things, and she was becoming more withdrawn, retreating into silence. The house, once our sanctuary, now felt like a prison. One night, I was jolted awake by the sound of Lily crying. It wasn't her usual whimper, but a terrified scream. I raced to her room, my heart pounding. Laura was already there, cradling Lily in her arms, trying to soothe her. "She was just screaming," Laura said, her voice shaking. "I don't know what scared her." I took Lily from her, holding her close. As I rocked her, I noticed something on the wall. It was faint but unmistakable, scratch marks, like someone had clawed at the paint. My blood ran cold. "Laura, look," I said, pointing. Her eyes widened in horror. "We have to get out of here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This isn't safe anymore." I nodded, my mind racing. But as much as I wanted to leave, something held me back. A morbid curiosity, a need to understand what was happening, to face it head on. "Just a little longer," I said. "Let's try to find out what this is, then we'll leave." Laura looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and disbelief. "Mark, this thing is tearing us apart. Why can't you see that?" "I do see it," I replied, my voice cracking. "But if we don't face it, it'll follow us. We need to end this." The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and growing paranoia. I spent hours researching, trying to find any clue about the history of our house. But there was nothing unusual. Just an ordinary suburban home with a dark secret. One afternoon, as Laura and I sat in silence, the baby monitor crackled again. This time, the voice was clearer, more insistent. "Help me," it whispered. Laura grabbed my arm, her face pale. "Mark, did you hear that?" "I heard it," I said, my own fear mirrored in her eyes. "We need to find out what it wants." Against my better judgment, I knew we had to dig deeper. Whatever was haunting our home wasn't going away, and I couldn't let it destroy my family. The whispers were leading us somewhere, and we had no choice but to follow. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of something terrible. My mind raced with thoughts of what could be lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. I knew one thing for sure. The whispers had awakened something dark, and it was up to me to confront it, no matter the cost. The whispers had grown louder, more demanding. Every night, they invaded my dreams, pulling me deeper into a nightmare I couldn't escape. The house seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, and I knew we were running out of time. Something had to be done. It was a stormy night when everything came to a head. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and rain pounded against the roof. Laura and Lily were asleep, but I couldn't rest. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the whispers through the baby monitor. They were calling my name, urging me to come to them. I got up, my heart racing, and made my way to the attic. I had to know what was up there. The old disused space had always given me the creeps, but now it felt like the source of all our torment. Armed with a flashlight, I climbed the creaky stairs and pushed open the door. The attic was dark and dusty, filled with forgotten boxes and cobwebs. As I swept the flashlight beam across the room, I saw it. An old baby monitor, identical to Lily's, sitting on a wooden crate. My breath caught in my throat. How long had it been there? Why hadn't I noticed it before? Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand, but saw nothing. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls, surrounding me. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and turned to see a figure standing in the shadows, barely visible. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" The figure stepped forward, revealing the face of a young woman, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "Help me," she whispered, her voice the same one I'd heard through the monitor. "Why are you here?" I asked, my fear mingling with a desperate need to understand. "What happened to you?" She pointed to a corner of the attic, where a dusty old crib stood. I walked over, heart pounding, and saw something that made my blood run cold. A series of drawings, like a child's scribbles, depicting a dark figure standing over a crib, watching. "This house," she said, her voice trembling. "It took my baby. It won't let us go." Before I could respond, the attic was filled with a deafening roar. The shadows seemed to come alive, swirling around me. I felt a crushing weight on my chest, like invisible hands squeezing the life out of me. I fell to the floor, gasping for breath. "Mark!" Laura's voice cut through the chaos. She had followed me, and now stood in the doorway, eyes wide with terror. "What's happening?" "It's the house," I choked out, struggling to my feet. "We have to destroy it. The monitor, it's the key." Without hesitation, Laura grabbed the old baby monitor and smashed it against the floor. The roar intensified, and the shadows writhed in agony. The young woman's spirit seemed to dissolve, her face finally at peace. But it wasn't over. The house itself seemed to shake with rage, and the whispers turned to screams. Laura and I ran downstairs, grabbing Lily from her crib. As we rushed towards the front door, the walls closed in, and a dark figure appeared at the end of the hallway, blocking our escape. "No!" I shouted, pushing Laura and Lily behind me. "You won't take them." The figure lunged, and I braced myself for impact. But instead, it dissipated into a cloud of darkness, swirling around us before vanishing completely. The house fell silent. The oppressive weight lifted. Outside, the storm had passed, and the air was clear. We stood on the porch, trembling and holding each other tightly. "It's over," Laura whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's finally over." But I wasn't so sure. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't seen the last of the house. The whispers might be gone, but their memory lingered, a dark shadow in the back of my mind. For now, we were free, but I knew that some things, once awakened, never truly sleep. We moved out of the house the very next day, leaving behind the place that had become our nightmare. It wasn't just about escaping the whispers or the shadows. It was about reclaiming our sanity, our peace. However, even as we settled into a new home, the psychological scars of what we'd experienced lingered. I found myself constantly on edge, jumping at the slightest noise. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, sent my heart racing. I knew it wasn't rational, but fear has a way of embedding itself deep within you, making you doubt everything. Laura tried to put on a brave face, but I could see the strain in her eyes. She'd always been the strong one, but now she was haunted by nightmares, waking up in a cold sweat, gasping for breath. Lily, thankfully, seemed unaffected, her innocent giggles a stark contrast to our troubled minds. We held on to her tightly, as if she were our anchor to normalcy. One evening, as we sat on the couch trying to distract ourselves with a movie, Laura turned to me, her face pale and drawn. "Mark, do you think it's really over? That we're safe now?" I didn't know how to answer. "I hope so, Laura, but I keep thinking about what that woman said, about the house taking her baby. What if it's not just the house? What if it's something following us?" Laura shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "I don't know how much more of this I can take. We need to do something, anything, to make sure it's over." Determined to put an end to our fear, I did some research and found a local priest willing to bless our new home. He was a kind, gentle man who listened to our story without judgment. He walked through each room, murmuring prayers and sprinkling holy water. It brought a brief sense of relief, but the shadows in our minds remained. A few weeks later, I decided to visit the old house one last time. I needed closure to see it for myself and ensure there was nothing left to haunt us. Laura was reluctant, but she understood. "Just be careful," she said, kissing me softly, "and come back to us." The house stood empty, a ghost of its former self. As I walked through the silent rooms, memories of the whispers and the shadows flooded back. It felt like a different place, devoid of the oppressive energy that had once filled IT. I made my way to the attic, the scene of our final confrontation. To my surprise, the old baby monitor was still there, lying broken on the floor. I picked up one of the fragments, turning it over in my hands. That's when I saw it, a small hidden compartment in the base of the monitor. Inside was a slip of paper, yellowed with age. I unfolded it and read the scrawled handwriting. "It's not the house, it's us. We brought it with us." A chill ran down my spine. What did it mean? Had we somehow awakened the malevolent presence? Or had it always been a part of us, lying dormant until the right moment? As I stood there, lost in thought, I heard a familiar sound, a soft whisper calling my name. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, echoing off the walls. "Mark, come back to us." I stumbled down the stairs, the whisper following me. It wasn't coming from the house. It was in my head, a part of me. I realized with a sinking feeling that we hadn't escaped it all. The darkness had latched onto us, and it would follow us wherever we went. When I returned home, I didn't tell Laura what I'd found. She looked at me with hopeful eyes, and I forced a smile. "It's over," I said, hugging her tightly. We're safe now. But deep down, I knew the truth. The horror we'd faced wasn't tied to a place. It was a part of us, a shadow that would never fully go away. We'd have to live with it, learn to coexist with the whispers that lingered in the corners of our minds. And every night as I lay in bed, I listened to the silence, waiting for the whispers to return. Because they always would. The darkness was a part of us now, a shadow we could never truly escape. Shadowplay. Did you ever think your childhood fears were just silly nightmares? I used to think that. Then I moved back to my old house after my divorce. Figured a fresh start might help, you know? The place was a creaky old one-bedroom house in a quiet town where everyone knows your name and your business. It was full of memories, some good, some bad, and some... well, I didn't want to think about those. I'm Jason Turner, 35, divorced, and back in the house where I grew up. My brother, Tommy, he disappeared from this very house when I was 8. One minute he was there, playing with his imaginary friend, the next, gone without a trace. I was the last one to see him, and that memory haunted me, even now. So I was unpacking some old boxes, trying to set up my new life in this old place. I found Tommy's favorite stuffed bunny in a dusty toy chest. It was like a punch in the gut. That night, things got weird. I heard faint whispers, like a child's laugh, echoing through the halls. The next day, I ran into Mrs. Henderson, my new neighbor. She's this sweet but odd old lady. She told me, "Be careful in that house, dear. It has a history." I laughed it off, but her eyes, they had this serious, almost fearful look. "History? What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. "Just, children shouldn't play alone there," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Then she shuffled away, leaving me with a shiver running down my spine. So there I was, back in my old house with more questions than answers. And those whispers, they were just getting started. Did you ever get that feeling, like someone's watching you? That's how I felt, unpacking boxes and trying to settle in. The whispers I heard the first night didn't stop. They got louder. Sometimes it felt like they were right next to me. It was about a week after Mrs. Henderson's warning. I was fixing up the living room, trying to make it look less like a storage unit and more like a home. The air had a strange, heavy feel to it, and no matter how much I aired the place out, it always smelled a bit musty, like wet earth. One night, I was in the kitchen making dinner when I noticed the old toy chest was open again. I could have sworn I had closed it. The stuffed bunny, Tommy's favorite, was sitting on top, its button eyes staring at me. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Okay, this is getting weird," I muttered to myself. I picked up the bunny, intending to put it away for good. The fur was rough, matted with age, and as I held it, I could almost hear Tommy's laughter from years ago. But then, there it was again, a faint giggle, like it was coming from the hallway. "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice echoed back at me, the house swallowing my words. Another day, while I was at work, my coworker Jim asked if everything was all right. "You look like you haven't slept in days, Jason. Everything okay at home?" Jim's concern was genuine, but it made me uneasy. "Yeah, just getting used to the old place again. It's nothing," I replied, forcing a smile. I didn't want to sound crazy, but the house had a way of getting under my skin. At night, shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision. I'd catch glimpses of something small and dark, darting out of sight. The whispers grew louder, almost like someone was whispering right into my ear. One evening, the temperature dropped suddenly, even though it was the middle of summer. The windows fogged up, and I could see my breath in the air. The whispers turned into clear, distinct words. "Come play with me." I was lying in bed, frozen in fear, my heart pounding in my chest. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing closer. I shut my eyes tight, praying it was just a nightmare. But deep down, I knew something was very, very wrong. The house wasn't just an old building with memories. It was alive with something dark and unsettling. The whispers, the shadows, they were just the beginning. Living in that house was starting to take its toll on me. The whispers were constant, the shadows relentless. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I tried to ignore it, something would happen. A door creaking open, the sound of tiny footsteps, the stuffed bunny moving to a new spot. One night, I invited Jim over. Maybe having someone else around would help. We sat in the living room, a couple of beers between us. I tried to keep things casual, but the house had other plans. You really let this place go, huh? Jim joked, looking around. His laugh was forced. Yeah, it's been a project, I replied, glancing at the toy chest. The bunny was staring at us again. Jim noticed my unease. What's really going on, Jason? You look like you've seen a ghost. I hesitated, then decided to come clean. It's this house, man. Weird stuff's been happening. Whispers, shadows, that damn bunny. I think it's Tommy. Jim's face grew serious. Tommy? Your brother? Jason, you sure you're not just stressed out? I wanted to believe it was just stress, but the look in Jim's eyes told me he knew it was more. I don't know. Maybe I'm losing it. The lights flickered, and Jim jumped. Jesus, what was that? Welcome to my world, I said, trying to laugh it off, but my voice cracked. After Jim left, I felt more alone than ever. I called my ex-wife, Sarah, hoping to hear a familiar voice. Maybe she could give me some perspective. Jason, it's late. What do you want? Her tone was cold, like always. I needed to talk. Weird things are happening here. I think it's connected to Tommy. There was a long pause. Jason, you need to let go. Tommy's gone. You can't keep doing this to yourself. Her words stung, but she was right. Yeah, maybe you're right. Thanks, Sarah. Take care of yourself, Jason, she said, softer this time, before hanging up. I sat there staring at the phone. She didn't understand. No one did. I was alone in this. The house seemed to pulse with a dark energy, feeding off my isolation. In the quiet of the night, I heard a door slowly creak open. I grabbed a flashlight and followed the sound, my heart pounding. The door to the attic was ajar. I hadn't been up there in years. My internal struggle was tearing me apart. Part of me wanted to run, to leave the house and never look back. But another part, the part that needed answers, pushed me forward. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The attic was cold, the air thick with dust. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing old boxes and forgotten memories. And then I saw it, Tommy's old diary, lying open on the floor. I picked it up, hands shaking. The pages were filled with drawings and entries about his imaginary friend, Shadow. The last entry sent a chill down my spine. Shadow wants to play forever. My mind raced. Was Tommy's imaginary friend real? Was it still here? The whispers grew louder, almost mocking me. I realized I was dealing with something far beyond my understanding, and there was no turning back. I couldn't sleep that night. Tommy's diary felt like a lead weight in my hands. The more I read, the clearer it became. Shadow wasn't just an imaginary friend. It was something much darker. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. But one thing was certain. I had to face whatever was haunting this house. The next day at work, I was a mess. Jim pulled me aside, genuine concern in his eyes. Jason, you look terrible. You need a break. Maybe stay with someone for a bit. I can't, Jim. It's the house. I need to figure this out. It's about Tommy, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. Jim sighed, placing a hand on my shoulder. All right, but don't do anything crazy. Call me if you need anything. Back home, the atmosphere was suffocating. The whispers were louder, the shadows more oppressive. I took a deep breath and made my way to the attic again. I had to confront whatever was up there. As I climbed the stairs, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged the air, and the flashlight flickered ominously. The attic was pitch dark, the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow the light. The diary lay where I had left it, open to that final, chilling entry. I called out, my voice shaky. "Shadow, what do you want?" For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a cold, childlike voice echoed through the attic. "I want to play." My heart raced as a figure emerged from the darkness. A small, shadowy child with glowing eyes. It looked like a twisted version of Tommy, but I knew it wasn't him. It was Shadow, and it was terrifyingly real. "Why Tommy?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "He was lonely. Like you are now," Shadow replied, a sinister smile spreading across its face. I felt a mix of anger and fear. "He didn't deserve this. Let him go." Shadow laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "He's mine forever. And now, so are you." The flashlight flickered again, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I remembered the incantation I had found in the diary. It was my only hope. I began to chant, my voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. The shadows writhed and twisted, and Shadow's smile faded. It screamed, a sound that seemed to pierce through my very soul. The attic shook, boxes toppling over as the shadows surged towards me. I kept chanting, my voice now a desperate shout. Shadow lunged at me, its cold, dark form wrapping around me like a vice. The room spun, and I felt myself slipping away. But then, the shadows began to dissolve, and the surrounding pressure eased. Shadow's screams grew fainter until they were nothing but a whisper. The attic was still once more. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The darkness lifted, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt lighter. The whispers were gone. Shadow was gone, but the damage was done. In the silence, I heard a familiar, soft voice. "Thank you, Jason." I looked around, tears streaming down my face. "Tommy?" There was no answer, but I felt a warmth, a presence. Tommy was free, and maybe so was I. But the house still held its secrets, and I knew my battle was only just beginning. The scars would remain, and the question lingered. Would Shadow find another friend to play with? The next few days were a blur. The house felt different, almost peaceful, but the memories of that night haunted me. Every creak and whisper in the silence brought me back to the attic, to Shadow's chilling voice, and Tommy's final words. I couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered. I took Jim's advice and stayed with him for a few days. His spare room was a welcome escape from the house. We talked late into the night, beers in hand, about everything but the house and what happened there. "You look better, Jason," Jim said one night. "You're starting to get some color back." "Yeah, thanks. It's good to be out of that place for a bit," I replied, though my thoughts were still back in the attic. Despite the respite, I knew I had to go back. The house was mine, and I couldn't let fear drive me away. When I returned, it was with a sense of cautious optimism. Maybe I could finally move on, live a normal life. As I settled back in, I started to clean the house more thoroughly, trying to reclaim it as my own. One afternoon, I found myself in the basement, a place I had always avoided. The air was damp and cold, the walls lined with old shelves and forgotten items. In the far corner, something caught my eye. A small door, almost hidden behind a stack of boxes. My heart pounded as I moved the boxes aside and opened the door. Inside was a small, dimly lit room. Dust motes danced in the faint light from a single bulb. And there, in the center of the room, was a large mirror, its surface covered in grime. I approached the mirror, wiping away the dirt. As I looked into it, My reflection stared back at me, but something was wrong. The reflection wasn't just me. It was me and Shadow, standing side by side. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. Shadow was supposed to be gone. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and Shadow's voice echoed in my mind. "You can't escape, Jason. We're bound together now." I shook my head, trying to deny it. "No, you're gone. I banished you." Shadow's laughter filled the room. "You can't banish what's a part of you. You invited me in, remember?" My mind flashed back to my childhood, to the nights spent alone, wishing for a friend. I had forgotten, but now it all came flooding back. Shadow wasn't just Tommy's imaginary friend. It had been mine first. I had let it in, and it had taken Tommy when it couldn't have me. Desperation clawed at my mind. "What do you want from me?" "To play forever," Shadow whispered, its voice a cold caress. "And now, you'll never be alone again." I realized the truth then, the horrifying twist that recontextualized everything. Shadow hadn't been banished. It had merged with me. The whispers, the shadows, they were all a part of me now. I was never alone because Shadow was inside me, feeding off my fears and loneliness. I smashed the mirror in a fit of rage, shards flying everywhere. But it was futile. The damage was done. Shadow's presence was a part of me, an echo of my own darkest thoughts and fears. I left the basement, the house feeling colder than ever. My life would never be the same. I had to learn to live with the darkness inside me, a constant companion, whispering in the shadows. And the worst part, I knew I could never escape it. Shadow was with me, always. Reflections of dread. It all started when Lily and I moved into the mansion we inherited from my estranged uncle. The place was huge, old, and filled with dusty relics from another era. As an architect, I was excited about restoring it, but Lily, my teenage daughter, was less enthusiastic. She missed her friends and didn't like the idea of living in a spooky, creaky house. We began unpacking and cleaning, and that's when we found the mirror. It was in the attic, covered in a thick layer of dust. The frame was beautifully carved, but the glass was cloudy, making it difficult to see our reflections clearly. I felt a weird pull towards it, like it was calling to me. That first night, I had a strange dream. Tom, my brother who disappeared when we were kids, was standing in front of the mirror, his reflection twisted and wrong. The next day, we had a visitor, an old man named Mr. Grayson. He said he knew my uncle and warned us about the mirror. His words were cryptic and eerie. "Some things are better left forgotten," he said, his eyes boring into mine. "Do you really believe in that kind of stuff?" Lily asked me later, trying to sound casual but failing to hide her unease. I shrugged. "I don't know, Lily. It's just an old mirror. Let's not think too much about it." After that strange visit from Mr. Grayson, things started getting weird. At first it was small stuff, like the odd noises at night. Houses creak, right? But these noises were different. Sometimes I'd hear whispers when no one was around, just faint enough to make me doubt my own ears. Lily started acting differently too. She seemed drawn to the attic, where we found the mirror. One evening, I found her just standing there, staring at it. The look in her eyes was vacant, almost as if she were in a trance. "Lily, what are you doing up here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She blinked and turned to me, a shiver running down her spine. "I don't know. It feels like someone's watching me." The air around the mirror felt colder than the rest of the house. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it too. A chill that seemed to seep into my bones whenever I got close to the thing. At night, the temperature would drop drastically, and I'd wake up covered in sweat, despite the cold. Then there were the smells. Old, musty scents mixed with something metallic, like blood. It was faint, but unmistakable. I tried to rationalize it, thinking it was just the smell of an old house, but it never seemed to go away. One afternoon, as I was working on some blueprints in the study, I noticed a shadow flickering just outside my peripheral vision. Every time I turned to look, it was gone, but the sensation of being watched grew stronger each day. "Dad, do you ever feel like we're not alone here?" Lily asked one night at dinner, her fork pushing peas around her platee. I paused, considering my words. "Sometimes, but it's just an old house with a lot of history. We're probably just adjusting to it." However, deep down, I knew it was more than that. The house, the mirror, everything seemed to have a life of its own, and it was getting harder to ignore the signs. One evening, as I was heading to bed, I saw a flash of movement in the hallway mirror. It was brief, like a fleeting image of a person. But when I looked again, there was nothing there. Just my own pale, worried face staring back at me. These small, unsettling details were adding up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. But how do you confront something that feels like a shadow, always just unreachable? As the days went by, the sense of dread grew stronger. And I couldn't help but wonder if Mr. Grayson's cryptic warnings were more than just the ramblings of an old man. Living in the mansion was taking its toll. The strange occurrences were becoming more frequent, and the tension between Lily and me was growing. She was spending more time alone, her usually bright demeanor replaced by a sullen, distant attitude. I could see the strain in her eyes, but every time I tried to talk to her about it, she shut me out. One evening, after another unnerving day, we had a rare family dinner in the grand dining room. The table, once a symbol of elegance, now felt like a battleground. Lily picked at her food, barely eating, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting something to jump out at her. "Lily, you need to eat," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've been acting really strange lately. Is everything okay?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and defiance. "You wouldn't understand, Dad. This place, it's doing something to us." I sighed, feeling a wave of frustration and helplessness. "I'm trying to understand, Lily, but you need to talk to me. We're in this together." She slammed her fork down, the sound echoing through the empty room. "You don't get it. Every time I'm near that mirror, I feel like I'm losing my mind. I see things that shouldn't be there." I stared at her, my heart pounding. I had been trying to ignore my own fears, chalking them up to stress and imagination. But hearing Lily voice the same anxieties made it impossible to deny. "Maybe we should move the mirror, get rid of it," I suggested, though the idea of touching it again filled me with dread. Lily shook her head violently. "No, it won't help. It's not just the mirror, it's this whole house. Likewise is like it's alive and it wants something from us." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of Tom, of the things Lily had said, and of Mr. Grayson's warning. I felt like I was on the brink of a revelation, but it was just unreachable, shrouded in the same murky fog that clouded the mirror. The next day, I decided to do some work in the attic, hoping to distract myself. But as I sorted through old boxes, I found more unsettling relics. Family portraits with eyes that seemed to follow me, and journals filled with frantic, nearly illegible handwriting. The entries spoke of strange visions and feelings of being watched, mirroring our own experiences. "Dad, what are we going to do?" Lily's voice broke the silence, startling me. I turned to see her standing in the attic entrance, looking smaller and more vulnerable than ever. "We're going to figure this out, Lily. Together. But I need you to trust me." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "I do trust you, but I'm scared. What if we can't fix this?" I pulled her into a hug, feeling her tremble against me. "We will. I promise. We'll get through this." However, as I held her, I couldn't help but wonder if my promise was an empty one. The mansion felt like a predator, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. and I was beginning to fear that we were already in too deep to escape its grasp. The tension in the mansion had reached a breaking point. Strange noises, fleeting shadows, and the constant sense of being watched wore us down. We needed answers, and I was determined to find them. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I decided it was time to confront the mirror once and for all. The house was eerily quiet as I made my way to the attic. Each creak of the wooden floorboards echoed in the silence, amplifying my fear. My flashlight cast long, shifting shadows that danced along the walls. As I reached the attic, I felt a chill run down my spine. The mirror stood there, almost as if it were waiting for me. Taking a deep breath, I approached the mirror. My reflection stared back, but there was something off. My eyes looked hollow, my face gaunt. I could see the room behind me in the reflection, but there was someone else standing there. It was Tom, my brother, just as I remembered him before he disappeared. His eyes were wide with fear, and he mouthed something I couldn't hear. "Tom," I whispered, reaching out to touch the glass. Suddenly, the mirror's surface rippled like water, and I was pulled into a vision. I was no longer in the attic, but in the same room, years ago. I saw Tom, younger and terrified, standing before the mirror. He was not alone. A dark figure loomed behind him, its presence suffocating and malevolent. "John, help me!" Tom screamed, his voice echoing in my head. I tried to move, to reach out to him, but I was paralyzed, forced to watch as the dark figure enveloped him, dragging him into the mirror. I could feel the figure's cold, clammy hands on my own skin, pulling me closer to the glass. "Dad!" Lily's voice shattered the vision, and I snapped back to the present-tel. She stood in the attic entrance, her face pale with fear. "Lily, get out of here!" I shouted, but it was too late. The mirror's pull was stronger now, and I could feel myself being drawn into its depths. With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed the crowbar I had brought with me and smashed it into the mirror. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, shards flying everywhere. Blood poured from a cut on my hand, but I didn't stop. I kept hitting it until the mirror was nothing but fragments on the floor. As the last piece fell, the dark presence in the room dissipated, leaving only an oppressive silence. I collapsed, panting, feeling a wave of exhaustion and relief. Lily rushed to my side, her eyes wide with concern. "Dad, are you okay?" I nodded, still catching my breath. "It's over, Lily. It's finally over." But as I looked around the attic, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Among the shattered glass, one shard remained intact, glowing faintly. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own, whispering secrets of the past and future. "Dad, look!" Lily pointed at the shard, her voice trembling. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against its cold surface. At that moment, I felt a connection, a glimpse into the mirror's history and the souls it had trapped. I saw their faces, heard their cries for help, and I knew that our ordeal was far from over. "We need to destroy this too," I said, my voice firm despite the fear in my heart. Lily nodded, her eyes steely with determination. Together, as we prepared to destroy the last piece of the mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to uncover even darker secrets. The mansion had a way of hiding its true nature. The destruction of the mirror's final shard wasn't easy. Lily and I stood in the attic, the faint glow of the shard casting eerie shadows on our faces. It felt as if the mansion itself was holding its breath, waiting for our next move. My hand still throbbed from the cut, but the pain grounded me, reminding me of what was at stake. "Are you ready?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound brave. Lily nodded, gripping the hammer tightly. "Let's end this." Together, we raised the hammer and brought it down on the shard. It shattered with a piercing shriek, and a wave of cold air rushed through the attic, extinguishing the light and leaving us in darkness. At that moment, I felt a strange sense of relief. The oppressive presence that had haunted us seemed to dissipate, leaving only silence. We stood there, catching our breath, the weight of our ordeal slowly sinking in. As the days passed, the mansion seemed to transform. The whispers stopped, the shadows receded, and the eerie coldness lifted. It was as if the house itself had been freed from a dark curse. Lily and I began to rebuild our lives, finding solace in the mundane routines of daily life. But the psychological scars ran deep. I couldn't shake the memories of what I had seen in the mirror, the vision of Tom, the dark figure, and the chilling sensation of being pulled into another world. Lily, too, struggled with her own fears, her nights plagued by nightmares that echoed the horrors we had faced. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace, Lily broke the silence. "Dad, do you think it's really over?" I looked at her, seeing the lingering fear in her eyes. "I think so, but we'll always carry a part of it with us. We have to find a way to live with that." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. What if there's more to it? What if we didn't destroy all of it?" Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I had thought the same thing, but had been too afraid to voice it. "We did everything we could, Lily. We have to believe that it's enough." But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking, waiting to be uncovered. The mansion, despite its newfound tranquility, held too many secrets. One night, while cleaning the attic, I found an old journal hidden behind a loose floorboard. It was worn and faded, the pages brittle with age. As I read through it, my heart sank. The journal belonged to one of the mansion's previous owners, and it detailed a similar experience: haunted mirrors, dark figures, and a struggle to break free. The final entry sent chills down my spine. "We thought we destroyed it all, but it always finds a way back. The mirror is just a conduit. The true evil lies deeper, in the very foundations of this house." I closed the journal, my mind racing. Had we only scratched the surface of the mansion's dark history? Were we still in danger? That night, I dreamed of Tom again. This time, he was standing outside the mansion, looking in through a window. His expression was one of sorrow and warning. "John, it's not over," he whispered, his voice echoing in my mind. I woke with a start, sweat soaking my sheets. The room was dark and silent, but the fear lingered, gnawing at my sanity. I got up and walked to Lily's room, needing to see her, to reassure myself that she was safe. As I opened her door, I saw her standing by the window, staring out into the night. "Lily, are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned to me, her eyes reflecting a cold, distant light. "Dad, I think I saw something. Someone." I rushed to her side, looking out the window, but saw nothing but darkness. "It's just your imagination, Lily. We're safe now." But even as I said the words, I felt a pang of doubt. Had we truly escaped the mansion's curse, or were we still trapped in its web of illusions? The thought was terrifying, and it made me question everything we had been through. As we stood there, staring into the night, a flicker of movement caught my eye. In the distance, near the edge of the property, I saw a faint, ghostly figure. It looked like Tom, his face pale and pleading. "Dad, do you see him?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yes, I see him." At that moment, I realized the truth. The mirror was just a symptom of a much deeper evil, an evil that had taken my brother and now threatened to take us. The mansion's dark history was far from over, and we were still very much a part of it.